So horror noir, the history of black horror as black history or black history as black horror, Birth of a Nation, King Kong, blackface, these early depictions of African Americans in film in general and in horror specifically. The sacrificial Negro quote, the sacrificial Negro trope. Um, the idea of this monster from the early days of Hollywood, we moved into what they describe in the documentary as the atomic age or post-war era, where there are no blacks in laboratories. They bring up the idea of these creatures from the Black Lagoon, these monsters, as being stand-ins for non-whites or these others. From there, we move into the 60s. The documentary moves and we move with it into the late 60s, Night of the Living Dead, where aside from, they don't mention this, but if we think about the Sidney Poitiers, aside from them, we don't really have, and specifically in horror, we don't have a black central character, a Dwayne Jones, the actor, the first black character who, in the words of Keith David, was really a man in this era of assassinations, civil rights, riots. So now, on this episode, or in this episode, we move into the 70s, the era of Blaxploitation, and we begin to deal with, among other things, black sexuality, specifically in black horror, and the horror of black sexuality to, the audience at large.
Anytime a documentary attempts to examine a subject matter as vast and as far-ranging as a genre, whether it be in literature or music or in this case cinema, it's carrying with it a huge weight. There's an incredible amount to unpack in a film like this. And it's very interesting because the film is an hour and 23 minutes and we're doing 2 episodes totaling over 2 hours. So that's a testament to how deep and how deep, murky, and surprising those waters are. As I've said in the past, horror has never been a genre that was really, it was really nothing. It was never something that I never went through that period as a teenager where I embraced horror, like so many of my friends who, it seemed almost that the people who did like movies, not on the same level as me, but people who did like movies loved horror. And I think part of the problem that I had was, even it was an elitist attitude even then, is that pardon the description, but the horror genre is a ghetto genre of cinema. Cheap, fast, oftentimes sloppy. But when you see something that is great, or when you see something that is either incredibly well done, like Carpenter or Tobe Hooper, you see that the genre itself has as much viability and as much possibility as drama, comedy, your epics, whatever, your bios, whatever. And I think what's great about horror noir, this Shudder documentary by Xavier Burgin, what's great about it is that it really digs into the idea of black filmmakers struggling to not simply find a voice, but to make something worth listening to. Horror as it is very easy to dismiss. And I'll give you a perfect example. I never wanted to see Blackula. I thought it was a ridiculous title. And when in the documentary, when the director William Crane, director of Blackula, says that the studio wanted to call it Count Brown from Downtown, and they laugh at that. I was like, how is that any worse than Blackula? How much worse is it, actually? It is worse, but Blackula?
I guess.
You know what I mean?
I guess. I mean, of course.
Yeah.
But the thing is that Blackula owns what it is.
Yes, it does.
Count Brown from Downtown.
Yes.
Sounds like it wants to be whatever the fuck it sounds like it wants to be.
It sounds like the Robert Townsend movie Jive Time Jimmy's Revenge. Did you ever see Hollywood Shuffle?
Yeah.
Jive Time Jimmy's Revenge. That's what that is.
No, I didn't.
You killed it, my brother.
But it's down. Well, what is it? Count Brown.
Brown from Downtown.
Count Brown from Downtown is it's off-white.
Yes.
Blackula is all of the horror of what that means.
Yeah.
It's like when it's the James Earl Jones that Jack Johnson.
Oh, The Great White Hope
film is that the where he has the voiceover where he says it might be something else where he says I'm black and they never let me forget it. I'm black and I'll never let them forget it. Something to that effect, right?
That sounds like The Great White Hope, yeah.
That's what Blackula is.
Mm-hmm.
Is regardless of we're in the mode and we're on the street corner, so to speak. Miles Davis did the Jack Johnson soundtrack. He also did On the Corner, where he's incorporating all this funk shit. We're on that intersection. We're in that universe of exploitation cinema in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And here, 1972 is a film that is exploiting the old fucking Dracula, but now and I'm sorry, Count Brown from Downtown or whatever has a ring to it, but Blackula is more memorable.
Blackula is more memorable. Well, this is the thing. Listening to William Crane and William Marshall in archival footage, William Marshall playing Count Blackula, talk about the genesis of the film and the ideas behind it and what was trying to be expressed, made it so that I really wanted to see that film. And now I am actively making an effort to see that film. I want to see it. I was dismissive. And that's I accept whatever kind of bullshit attitude anyone might want to have about something like that. But listening to an artist, a director, actor, screenwriter talk about their work and going into detail on what it means and what it represents means that you're seeing something from a different angle, something that is not readily available to you in a trailer. For whatever Blackula was or is, I imagine that the trailer put out by the studio that produced it and distributed it did not go into the marrow of what the film is. Instead, coasting on the idea of a blaxploitation horror film with a vampire history and a transfer of a Bela Lugosi to a William Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to lose all of what from just a trailer and what the studio puts out in that regard. You're going to lose out and miss everything that is underlying there. So that Scream Blackula Scream, which I didn't know Pam Grier was in that. Pam Grier makes it interesting enough to want to see as well. But the idea that this is a Black Prince, there's also Count Dracula in the beginning of the film, and that conversation about the slave trade. I mean, this seems like it might be heavier, weightier material that deserves a look. Now, Blackenstein or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Black or whatever, Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde.
Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde.
Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde. The authors in reviewing talk about how badly made those films are. And it's typical of genre filmmaking, because if you look at the original Universal films, the Frankenstein films definitely fell off in quality after James Whale left the project. Also, with the Dracula films, a loss of... you're not going to sit there and tell me that Dracula, the original Bela Lugosi, and Dracula's Daughters are comparable films. Or Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is comparable to The Bride of Frankenstein or the original Frankenstein. I mean, there's a falling off, and you can see that with budgetary constraints. You can see that with the desire to mash up two characters or to maximize audience interest, and that's what you get with a Blackenstein and a Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde. That being said, around this time, you do see interesting projects being made, and one of the most interesting in this genre, from a director that a film that I had heard of, have never seen, but know vaguely the history of, is a film by a director named Bill. Oh my God, what was his name? Bill Gunn?
The one who did Ganja and Hess?
Ganja and Hess. This idea of flirting with vampires, but black blood, African blood, the power, the Ganja and Hess. Bill Gunn. And Ernest Dickerson, who is one of the great cinematographers of, he did all of Spike Lee's early work up to and including Malcolm X, and then went off to have his own directing career with a few successes in the feature film, but working mostly in television, including the Walking Dead series and a couple other things. When he talks about Bill Gunn coming to Howard University to speak and not even being able to have a print of his own film, because the only print of the film is in the museum of the Smithsonian. Was it in the Smithsonian or?
I don't remember. It might be.
It's a major. It's an archive. It's a museum archive. Well, all museums, but to know that this man shot Cassavetes style, this idea that someone would give him money for a straightforward horror film, and he would create what a lot of people would consider an underground masterpiece that defies convention, and would never, in the early days at least, would never be seen in its full directorial scope vision. I mean, I'm not talking about aspect ratio. I'm talking about the idea of what the director wanted to get across. I found that a fascinating story that I want to look into, and that I want to see this film, because that's Dwayne Jones as well, isn't it?
Is it Dwayne Jones? I'm
I
not
think
sure.
it's Dwayne. It looked like an older Dwayne Jones,
Yeah, it
maybe
is.
7
It
or
is
8 years
Dwayne
later, after Night of the Living Dead. The Criterion Collection, Night of the Living Dead disc has interviews, and there's commentary, and they talk a little bit about Dwayne Jones. I think there's an audio interview where he talks about Night of the Living Dead and in part Ganja and Hess. So I'm gonna have to go back to that. But these are what's great about this is like Bukowski wrote about discovering John Fante in the Los Angeles Public Library, and he said it was like finding gold at the dump.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
every once in a while, you do that with cinema.
Literally.
You find it, yeah, yeah. If you've ever been there, that is exactly what happened here. Where I think there you have to be able to. One of the great things about documentaries such as horror noir is that it makes available to you, in your mind at least, films that you can search out. And the great thing about today is that you can find these. It's more. You're better able to locate these films in their original form than you have at any other time. I mean, you and I both come from the time of the Tower Records, the Olympic Video, Warehouse, what you could check out from the library. Now it's a matter of, if you dig deep enough into the internet, you most likely will be able to find a print of something. Even if it's an ugly, bad print that's not high definition, you're able to find films that are seemingly lost. Ganja and Hess is on that long list of films that I hope to see in this lifetime. And now, after seeing this movie,
Yeah.
I want to seek it out.
It looks like it's on Prime.
That's what I'll be watching tonight. Then I'll be watching that.
Yeah, repackaged as Blood Wedding.
Blood Wedding, is that what it is? Or Blood?
No, Blood Couple.
Blood
Couple
yes.
is what it was repackaged as. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that you would have these films like this, films like Sweetback, this kind of these underground masterpieces. And they're so underground that it's like, you have your undergrounds. I mean, Night of the Living Dead is fucking underground.
Yeah.
It was a midnight movie.
Mm-hmm.
But it's fucking not as midnight as this shit. Because
no,
and I don't mean Midnight Black.
No, I know what you mean.
It's that it has to be recut and re-fucking packaged as Blood Couple, because that's, that has a little bit more whatever to it. But it's in this time that also you it's the fucking 70s. Mm-hmm. So Blaxploitation is also black sexuality again.
Yeah.
Going back to Blackula, it's look at if we're talking about the scope of all of this, think about pornography. Think about 70s porn and all of that. Mm-hmm. But then fast forward even to now, where the fucking racism and horror that still is these tropes that are used in pornography, where still there is this fear of black sexuality to where it becomes a fetish genre. Well, that it's recently become. It's been.
No, absolutely. But qualify that: fear and fascination.
Of course,
fear and fascination. Yeah, it's
fear and loathing, fear and fascination. Fucking I mean, that's the thing is like it's shame, it's fucking attraction, it's all of this and that, and it's to where the BBC genre that's a monster. You know what I mean? Like Othello. You know what I mean? Like it's all over. And so that you can, when you have Rachel True talking about William Marshall as Blackula, and she described the era, the vampires of that era, the Draculas of that era, as these soft metrosexual white guys who didn't have an energy to them. And
I agree with her to a degree, but not on Bella.
Well, I mean,
but that's nitpicking.
That's nitpicking. But think about that. I'm glad you bring that up, because think about, okay, Bela Lugosi. Think about Christopher Lee, the Hammer films.
Yeah.
I wouldn't consider them metrosexual.
No.
I would not consider Christopher Lee metrosexual. I mean,
at all. Not Christopher Lee.
Metrosexual is a very like late 20th century fucking phenomenon, and Christopher Lee is very fucking Victorian, or fucking, you know, something of, he's a throwback. That being said, from Rachel True's perspective, here was William Marshall versus a soft metrosexual white guy who didn't have an energy to him. To one group, it's seen as having a certain kind of energy, it's a certain kind of vibe. To another group, that vibe, that energy translates as horror. Even if the horror is beneath laughter, because you're looking at this thing and you're saying, like, and I don't mean thing the person, I mean thing this film. You're looking at it and saying, you're like, what the fuck? And you laugh. But that is something that keeps, I mean, Donald Trump was one of the people who perpetuated that birtherism fucking trope of Obama not even being born in the United States. That is just another version of, or the idea that Michelle Obama isn't really female, that she's trans, or she's this, or it's anything to dehumanize, anything to, and I'm not right now promoting fucking Michelle Obama or Barack Obama, right? I'm not doing that. I'm just talking about, this is part of the landscape.
Of course.
So that when you get these films like Abby, I haven't seen that either. Sugar Hill, you have the black sex demoness, basically. The black woman as voodoo goddess or the voodoo queen. And the as you describe it as a ghetto, last week you also described, in part one, you described it in terms of a ghetto, because it's like you say, these genre films, in the same way that they're the equivalent of these like cheap pulp trade paperbacks. They're not well made because they're not well funded. So that is to say that the book, the cover, the actual artifact is not well made. Maybe because it's made cheaply, but made rapidly. Maybe the content is not elevated, but there are things, including like these diamonds in the rough of ghetto, so-called ghetto black literature, even Iceberg Slim's Pimp, which is insane. But you look at a piece of work like that and you're saying, well, this is literature, and it is a particular type of literature, and there is horror to it because of the sexploitation of that.
Yeah.
But there is a style there. There is something there. and you can find these diamonds in the rough in this era. Once you get into the Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde and the Blackensteins, in the documentary, they talk about how this is kind of reflective of the Tuskegee experiment and these long-term the studies that look at the long-term effects of syphilis in African Americans, and even, I mean, recently you can see this in a lot of African American cultural attitudes toward vaccine with the pandemic, that are different. They're distinct from attitudes that you might see in fucking Huntington Beach, where it's like, no, I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm not going to be muzzled. I'm free. I'm white and I'm free. Versus, I don't know what's in that fucking thing. I don't know what they're going to do to me. Look at what they've done to us. Look at, you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
And I'm not, and of course you have the opposite on each side. Anyone can say anything, can come from any perspective. But what I'm broadly, and I am generalizing, is that culturally there are going to be different attitudes towards different things, and what that means when you add in the horror element to it. You can turn a vaccine scenario into a conspiracy theory. You can turn it into a horror story. But the different participants, based on their background and their cultural views and backgrounds, are going to have a different, and histories are going to come from a different place. So the 70s is an era of, in general, Keith David describes it as, we went from maids to pimps and hoes. Specifically, it's black sexual horror. It's not only like, oh, this creature is going to steal the white woman, but now it's, you know, what if the creature steals the white woman and she likes it? Or what if this female creature unleashes her sexual powers on society? That's, you know, that's a scary thought for certain groups. And so beyond that, we move into the 80s. And there's a transition in the late 70s where they don't really describe it as a transition, but they talk about these films that are transitional. And these films are they're late 70s, or they're on that border, but they also defy the first to die phenomena, the main characters.
Yeah.
Keith David in The Thing, obviously that's early 80s. He makes it till the end in The Thing. Yaphet Kotto in Alien, late 70s, is not the first to die. Ken Foree, Dawn of the Dead, late 70s, an exception. They talk about the first to die phenomenon, but they also describe when that doesn't happen, typically you'll have the African American as a measuring stick against which the monster's badness or badassness is measured. Can it hurt a tough black guy? If it can, it's really, really bad. Like there's a fight, you know, there has to be a fight scene with the. I mean, you can even look at like Roddy Piper fighting Keith David, and it's like, oh, this is a badass guy. He's fighting a black guy for a long ass time. He can go the distance.
Nah, see, I don't see that in that. I mean, I see race in a lot of things, but I don't see it in that. You know what I mean?
I'm using it as
Yeah.
a it fits. I'm not saying John Carpenter did that on purpose.
Mm.
I'm saying even that fits.
Yeah, you could argue that. No, I would agree that. Yeah. Look at him fight this badass black guy, this bald, big, tough guy. Yeah. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like tough by fucking proxy
Mhm.
at that point. Um, and at that point, although it's not necessarily that either, but when it's tough by proxy, that that is another form of the the non-black character becomes tougher, and the black character is now just a token.
Yeah.
Um, with the Ken 4E, Dawn of the Dead, he says that there was racial stuff in the script, and he said that he felt like he was going to be. He's like, I'm going to be alone on this. But this is actually one of the critiques that I have of this film, of this documentary, and obviously it's a time issue.
Yeah.
Is that they don't explore that. They mention it, but what I think is what kind of got me is that we're talking about 10 years later after Night of the Living Dead in the sequel.
Yeah.
Number one, we think of Romero as commenting on each, and we've talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
You can go back and go to the archives. If you like our shit,
yeah,
go to the fucking, and you want to dig in, go to the fucking archival, go to Libsyn.
We'll go to WatchThis with RickRamos.libsyn.com.
Libsyn.com.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
go to where there will be like a series of years in bold, followed by months. If you go all the way down, there will be a small calendar. Underneath that calendar is a search. You can type whatever you want into that search, and it'll bring up the episodes that apply. So if you want to see something on Scorsese, like I'll put in Scorsese, and there'll be like five or six episodes that come up that either mention Scorsese in the description or are focused on him and his work. You could do that same thing with horror. You can do it with specific actors. You can do it with themes. Noir is something that is big that will come up. Anything like that, yeah.
So we did this episode on Romero,
mm-hmm.
and so each version of the Night of the Living Dead, each version of his zombie film will comment on that kind of decade or that era or that whatever. What struck me was that, like, you look at Night of the Living Dead and it's seen as, in this film, I don't know, because this is another question in and of itself, is like, how conscious of the impact or of the symbolism was Romero when he made the film using Jones. He may have said, well, yeah, he was just the best guy that day.
Mm-hmm.
But I always question, was there some kind of inkling? Was it that, like, he was just that kind of let's get it done, utilitarian, like, about it, that it didn't matter? Or did he know when he was like, look, this is the best guy, but I understand that this is a black guy, and he dies at the end, this is fucking, like, this is something. Did he understand that? Whether he went on to really talk about that or not, I wonder about that. And in this, I get it that they focus more on, well, Jones just happened to be the best guy there, and it's not until supposedly Romero's driving with the prints, he's driving with the actual film cans in the car, that he hears on the radio that MLK's been assassinated, that then he makes the connection. I don't know if I really buy that. um, that it took him that fucking long to make the connection that a black character in this kind of film who dies at the end, that means something.
Yeah.
There's that. Now jump to 10 years later, where Ken Foree is saying that on the set of this guy's sequel, that there are some racial issues with the script, and that he felt like he was going to be alone on this. Having mentioned all that I mentioned before, I want to know more.
Yeah.
I want to know, like, what was taught, like, what are you talking about? Because they cut to, I don't even remember what exactly, and I didn't write it down, what the character says when that guy's on the floor and Ken Foree is standing above him with the gun. And he does say, Ken Foree's character says, it's different when the gun's pointed at you, isn't it? Or something like that.
There's that, but specifically when Ken Foree talks about racial issues with the script, there's a moment where Tom Savini,
there you go.
Tom Savini puts a saber through a vent, and he calls him a chocolate. Mm-hmm. He calls him chocolate something. So you're right. It touches on something without going into depth with it, so it leaves you hanging. It really does. It doesn't explore. It doesn't explore the minutia and the truth. You know, here you have an opportunity of the person who is in the film, who doesn't seem to have a problem talking about these issues,
right?
Or maybe he did have a problem talking about the issues, and they cut it out. I mean, who's to say what was discussed, what wasn't discussed? I think that as a director, if you have a softball pitch like that and you don't explore it, you're not doing your job as a filmmaker. But I can't be sure what was available to the filmmaker at that moment. So I don't know if it was weak filmmaking. I don't know if it was missing the ball. But what I will say is that as much as I like a great deal of this film, because I like movies about movies, I like documentaries about movies, all it really did was give me a couple of films to go explore, change my attitude about films that I had been dismissive of. But I don't feel like it told me a whole lot that I didn't already know. It didn't really go into detail of it. It's just like, okay, yeah, this is the way they feel about
it. You sacrifice depth for breadth.
Mm-hmm. Brevity.
You sacrifice depth for breadth. No, not brevity. For breadth, as in like wideness. What you gain horizontally, you lose vertically. Yeah. So you're not going as deeply because you're spreading out further through a broad like timeline. So that was, and we can. Let's hold on to our whatever critiques we have about this film, which that's kind of going to be probably the main one. But they also now they get into The Shining, mm-hmm. and they talk about Scatman. Mm-hmm. He survives in the book, but he dies in the film. So they use that as this kind of again, he's the sacrificial Negro, but he's at the same time what they describe it as the trope of the magical Negro. So he has this shining ability, which even the idea of shining and shine is also there's a slur.
There's a racist, of course.
And they don't really get into. I mean, it's kind of like that's one where you can get a lot of bang out of that. Just what I said already gives you a bunch of shit. So it's kind of like, okay, he dies, he's black, shine, sacrificial Negro. Okay, they move into the magical Negro is it kind of is like the fucking to use those tropes. It's kind of like that's the soul sister of the Voodoo Queen. When you think of like a Whoopi Goldberg, they bring up Whoopi Goldberg and Ghost, the wise black woman with some kind of power, and that becomes, it's not the maid, but it's this, she's wise, but at the same time it's kind of like she's using this dark knowledge. She's using something that's not, she's not fucking Von Helsing. She doesn't represent fucking white Western European science and scientific tradition standing in with the church behind it. She's basically what you would just call mumbo jumbo. Ooh, her little bag of fucking magical herbs from Louisiana.
Well, you're mixing characters on this one. What I think there's a difference though, because you have the voodoo priestess that you see in something like The Serpent and the Rainbow, or this idea
Wes Craven.
Wes Craven, who the interviewees recognize as a little bit more progressive in his at least attempts at incorporating a multicultural cast and not letting it just be as simple as a white exploration of this world, although in many cases it is. But if you look at the Whoopi Goldberg example, there's the magical Negro versus the voodoo priestess, which is not the same thing.
But it's under the same umbrella.
It's under the same umbrella.
The voodoo priestess is still, and I'm not saying Whoopi Goldberg's character is from Louisiana and that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's all under the same trope. Is this
there's a
black woman who has powers.
Yes, but there's a difference in the manipulation of those powers. So, for example, if you would have a black character whose job it is to be mystical, a voodoo princess, a voodoo queen. Oftentimes, it's not an actress that we're familiar with, which lends itself a certain sense of anonymity and danger. Whereas Alfre Woodard in the film that they showed her in, I don't remember what the film, they didn't mention what film it was. They just said Alfre Woodard in some film. Or Whoopi Goldberg. Those two characters are written specifically as help.
They're like sidekicks. They're like an agent of hate.
There's sidekicks that are there in order to make the white.
It's like a Black Yoda, basically.
Exactly. They're there to uplift. They're there to make a snarky comment but also save. But I think what's important about what is described is that the character's sole purpose is to save the white character, which is the same as the Hattie McDaniel character from Gone with the Wind.
Yes, I agree with you.
So that's
and even if you look at it, and this is now I'm adding another layer to it, but it's like even the idea of like, well, to what ends are you using these powers? Is it white magic, so-called, or is it black magic, so-called?
Yeah.
And in this case, it's black magic and off-white magic.
Well, it's not even called white magic. It's just called magic. Magic implies good. And black qualifies it as the danger,
Right. But it's still, and, without going into occultism, but it is still, it's not only the intention, but it's like, well, they are both a magical Negro, but one is now mixed with fucking the token. This one is mixed with the fucking. This one is mixed with the creature from the Black Lagoon. You know the you know the Voodoo Queen is next to the fucking Salma Hayek's character in fucking Dusk Till Dawn. There's a parallel there, and that one is also, there's a sexual element to it, whereas like Whoopi Goldberg's is a mammy character, which is not sexual.
No.
So by this point, we're in the 80s. They describe, you know, white flight, suburban horror, where you get a lot of horror films now are before they were, the house was like, it was haunted. You would think of the house as just exclusively a haunted place. But now you have like suburban horror, which the haunting version here is Poltergeist, which is Indian burial ground trope, which has a folk horror element to it. You have your Halloweens, your Nightmare on Elm Streets, all of that. This is the 80s where you're dealing with those primary tropes of suburbia, slasher, magical Negro. The slasher, obviously, maybe it's a mugger, and Jason Takes Manhattan or something like that, and it's like, well, and I don't even know where that falls, and if that's early 90s, late 80s, whatever. But the point is that, you know, if the creature, the villain, the monster, or whatever, is in Central Park and there's muggers, you know, but they're gonna be the fucking black muggers that Trump wants to execute, and him and Charles Bronson, and
don't be shit on Charlie. There's some shit I won't stand.
Yeah, I know. And so the monster kills, you know, that it's, and it'll be the black character, and then it'll be the white slut character who shows her tits.
Yeah.
She's the next one. So then we move into the 90s, and one of the big ones that they focus on is Candyman.
Never seen it. I've never seen it.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
That surprises me.
Yeah. Well, it's I know the film, but it fell into that category. I just thought it was, you know, just shitty exploitation horror film. I never thought that it would. I didn't think that it would be. I didn't think it was missing anything. I didn't think it elevated the genre or anything. So I skipped it completely. But there is something about listening to Tony Todd talk about the film and listening to Ken Foray and Keith David talk about Tony Todd. It makes me want to see it. It makes me want to watch the film. And in fact, it makes me want to actually go into the series and figure out, do they create greater depth in the sequels? Because that's what they're talking about. They're talking about a film that really, what is the character, the saint?
It's an urban legend.
Yeah,
it's kind of like
the filmmaker. I'm not sure which one watching it, was it Kundif or one of the other ones who said the patron saint of urban legends or something like that. That's how they described it, and that I found that interesting.
Well, it's kind of like this, like a La Llorona kind of character, or one of these characters. You know, there were the urban legends that if you fucking stood in the mirror in your bathroom and you splashed water, Bloody Mary. You splash water on the mirror and you say a thing a few times. You know what I mean? And then if you either Beetlejuice comes out or this fucking Bloody Mary or this black guy with a hook, and you know, turn off the lights, whatever. It's these urban legends, but this is Chicago, South Side, Cabrini Green.
Yeah.
which is another. I would have figured that you would have been interested.
Yeah. I've been to Cabrini Green. When it was there,
I know,
I've been there.
I know. You
Very
walked through it
interesting.
to go watch a movie,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, the idea of interracial conflict there,
Hmm.
but at the same time, they still describe it as problematic, because he's still just a black character lusting after the white woman,
Yeah.
and he targets. They talk about this too, is that he targets blacks in the community, whereas he could have targeted, if it was this revenge thing of this character who has been lynched, and that's kind of like the origin. It's like, well, why is he going out after people in the projects? Um, but it's one of those gritty um, 90s horror VHS films, and it's got Philip Glass did the music.
Hmm.
So it is interesting, and that character, um, Ken Foree is like, he's great. Um, then they talk about a few other 90s. They talk about this one film called Death by Temptation. I had never heard of it.
Oh, I had heard it.
Early
Death by
90s.
Temptation. Yeah. DEF, Death by Temptation. That was Kadeem Hardison. They were trying to make a star out of that guy. He was on A Different World, the
Okay.
Cosby spinoff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was a real low. I don't even think that got a theatrical release. I think that was straight to video, and I don't know. It had something to do with a devil woman or something like that. I don't remember it.
It was like the spiritual inner conflict with this
Hmm.
character, and it really reminded me, looking at the footage that they were showing, it reminded me of fucking My Mind's Playing Tricks on Me, the early 90s Ghetto Boys horror video.
Yeah.
um this year, Halloween for all the weekend.
Hmm.
um
Great line.
yeah, robbing little kids for bags. Then they move into Tales from the Hood. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I saw Tales from the Hood in a theater. I remember
Okay.
seeing that. I was really interested in it because and it was actually better than I thought it was going to be. It was actually pretty good. It was but I was familiar with Rusty Cundiff because in the 90s his directorial debut was a film called Fear of a Black Hat. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Yeah.
That made me
Is
laugh
that
my
the
ass off.
that's New York, right? Is it?
I think it might have been set in New York. I'm not really sure, but it was about a rap group, and he was the leader, and it was two other guys, and it was a really it was like Spinal Tap. They were going for a Spinal Tap thing, and I
Yeah.
think it got buried at the time because that same year Chris Rock had done CB4, which is not a good film. I mean, it's a good bad film. It's a fun bad film. It's really anyway. It's like in a lot of things. CB4 had a studio behind it. I think it had Universal, and this was just somebody who was doing an independent thing. This was in the heyday of the independent film channel and um, Sundance and all of that. I mean, and I remember watching it, laughing my ass off, thinking this guy's got something, and it kind of made me sad that Cundiff didn't get a whole lot of work after that because he was good. And Tales from the Hood was a weird, dark. Um, it played with the horror genre, but it had a very definite African American slant to it. So it was very much of the culture. So you had issues that were dealing with racism, slavery, police beatings. But then you had that episode of child abuse, which is actually the best segment in the film, if I remember correctly. How do you remember the film? Did you see it in the theater? Did you rent it? What?
No, I rented it,
Mhm.
and David Allen Greer.
Yeah, and
Um,
he's very good in it. Very surprising
yeah,
what a scumbag piece of shit he is in that film.
yeah, and this is like in living color.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
I don't know if in living color is still on at that point or what, but David Allen
I'm pretty
Greer
sure it was.
is fucking in living color. Um, and so to see, I even at that time it was like, well, he's that guy who's like hated it.
Oh, try doing that today. Jesus Christ.
Men in Film or something like that. It
Yeah,
was
men on film. Men on film.
Men on Film.
Yeah.
Um, I a year ago or something like that, I showed that to Leslie.
She had never seen
And
it.
I went down. She had never seen it,
Wow.
and we were just fucking laughing because it's so fucking crazy.
It is
And I was like,
incredibly offensive, but you know what?
yeah,
I know gay people that think it's hilarious. It's really who you talk to and the attitudes that they have about it. But it's fucking. I think it's great.
I mean, it's the performances. They're having fun, and it's offensive. Yes, it's offensive,
Yeah.
but that show is like that's the point. Is that it's a comment on all of this shit, and it's satire, and you know that's what they're fucking doing. So that's what it is. But how they were able to tackle all of these, going back to the film, to tackle all of these issues in an anthological way of having these different episodes, and you're talking about, well, what are the horrors that are facing the Black community in the 90s? Well, you don't need to say in the 90s. It's still.
Yeah.
But at that point specifically, it was like gangs, police brutality, domestic abuse, the idea of Black justice, um, and how does that play into it? Where go back to the first episode that we did about this, where they're talking about Dwayne Jones and they're saying, well, he's killing all these white zombies, and that you're at that point you're like rooting the Black viewers rooting for that character, and they're seeing something completely different than someone who's just saying, well, they're just zombies. What do you mean, like he's killing white zombies? They're just zombies. And it's like, no, they're fucking killing white zombies. This means this is a different thing.
Yeah, in that original film, I don't even remember there being a black zombie. I have to watch it again, but I don't remember there being a black zombie in that first film. Definitely in the subsequent films, yes, but not in that first one.
Right.
And that does matter. It does matter.
Yeah. And then it goes into The Craft.
Haven't seen it.
And
not interested, really.
The Craft it's a timepiece. It's a 90s fucking it's definitely like it's like watching Party of Five or something like that. It's a 90s fucking timepiece. Whatever that means to whoever the fuck you are. And if you're if you remember the 90s and if you kind of like came of age during that period, then it means you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you have so Rachel True's featured in this documentary, and you have these characters, these four girls, and each of them has their like thing. Anorexia, suicide, the Verusa Balk, or whatever the character, the angry character. Rachel True's character's issue is blackness, and racism, and True describes how to her it was kind of like at that point she had internalized like her own experience of racism to the degree that it didn't even seem like an overt type of issue, because it was just kind of like this kind of day to day, just like, I guess today you would call it like these microaggressions or whatever. You know, just like everyday racism.
Yeah.
It wasn't like crosses burning on her lawn. It was just everyday fucking bullshit. But then in the film, they really like explore more about how she's picked on and all that. And what I think is interesting, I mean, they don't explore that in this film, but it's also interesting in, you know, the 90s, there was this, it was another wave of like goth subculture. And it kind of tied in with that, this kind of idea of like, okay, the goth subculture, vampires, turning Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire into a film, and Vampire Masquerade and all this stuff that's kind of coming into it, while you have this wave of goth music going on Marilyn Manson will be attached to that after. I mean, he's not goth, but you kind of have things that are like being pegged on it. But also within that is the idea of like, well, gothic as the goth subculture as this like white space. A lot of times there was this idea that was like where the marginalized white kid would end up, or the marginalized white girl would end up, or the introverted white girl would end up as a goth. Or at least in my area where I grew up, it was like people would make jokes about the fat Mexican goth girl, and you know what I mean. And it's like this thing, but the idea of like, no, it's not like this. That's not a white ghetto goth. As a subculture, it's very music based, so it was a place where people who share common aesthetic and common musical interest can go. And so it's interesting that you have Rachel True as this like black character that wasn't in that film a token. Because in that space it wasn't, it wouldn't be expected stereotypically for there to be a token like that. So that's just an observation that I found interesting. They touch on Eve's Bayou.
Eve's Bayou is a beautiful film, and I remember watching that in a theater and being overwhelmed by the beauty of it. But I was still too young to really process the whole thing. I don't know what the hell I was expecting, but I picked it up recently in the last Criterion Barnes and Noble sale, and again, that's one that I'm looking for. Have you seen it?
Long ago.
I remember.
I remember only before you. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, please.
Jada. I remember only Jada from like. Basically, I remember her the best from Menace.
Jada wasn't in that.
Menace to Society.
Jada wasn't in Eve's Bayou.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Jada was.
Isn't Jada Pinkett in?
Not Eve's Bayou.
What is she in?
Well, they profiled her in some movie that.
Who am I thinking about?
I don't know, but it was a little girl. It was a little girl. I don't remember. You're not thinking of the right movie. Jada Pinkett was.
I'm trying to figure out what I am thinking about.
You're thinking about the film that.
Who am I?
Well, you're thinking about the film that.
What or who?
Ernest Dickerson had directed in that segment, where he's talking about her and Billy. I think that's Demon Knight. I think that's Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight.
Tales from the Crypt. That's like the second one, right?
Yeah, that's the second film in that series. He directed that film. Eve's Bayou was a film set in Louisiana in the 50s or 60s with Samuel Jackson in a small role, but it was Samuel Jackson coming off of Pulp Fiction, so there was he had cachet behind him. So you could get a film like that funded because it was Sam Jackson, and he was the father, and it was Lynn Whitfield, and Lynn Whitfield had she was kind of big at that moment, and that's all I remember about it. It's just he was. I think he was a bit of a womanizing husband. She wishes death upon him, but it's I just remember digging it while I watched it. I couldn't really tell you what the film was about now, but it was Sam
So just
Jackson.
Creole.
Yeah. Diane Carroll was
for some reason, for some reason I'm thinking that shit is Jada Pinkett, but
no.
But the main girl is the 10-year-old, right?
Journey Smollett, yeah. Mm-hmm. Young girl who, Jada Pinkett would have been in her 20s by that point. I think Jada had already done Menace at that point. That's when everybody still liked Jada Pinkett. Before she became Miss Will Smith. No, even before the slap.
Her
yeah, exactly.
Sacrificial Negro.
Yeah.
But it's a more of a, from what I remember, and I could be completely off base at this point, but it has more of a magic realism to it than it's not like straight horror. It's not.
It's
but
not straight
there is
horror. It's more the horror of life. It's more how religion affects us, and the cultural ways and how they it seems like a more real and natural film than your traditional horror film where it's more supernatural. This is not that. I don't remember East Bayou being that. I remember it being more of a
it's more what people just say loosely is like, well, it's more spiritual.
Yeah. But it's also almost, I don't remember there being any white characters at all in it. So it's a very, maybe there's a sheriff there or something. I don't know. But it seemed to be a real slice of life of the black community. And there's a handful of films that do that. This is one of them. Forrest Whitaker's, Bill Duke's A Rage in Harlem is another film that is almost an entirely black cast. And I think this film is that. I could be wrong, but this is one. It's sitting on the shelf, and I have to go back to it and check this out and see what it is, see what it was. It's one that I'm looking forward to going back to, definitely.
From there, they move into the 2000s, and they focus primarily on three films: Attack the Block. I haven't seen it,
but it's supposedly really good. Again, sitting on the shelf.
The Girl with All the Gifts. I haven't seen it.
I had never even heard of it until this film.
I hadn't heard of either of those two. And so this is I'll call those pending. And Get Out, which we've done an episode on.
Yeah, we did an episode on it. And with Jordan Peterson, it's
Jordan Peele.
I'm sorry.
Jordan Peterson is a different horror story.
Yeah. Much different horror story. Jordan Peele, Get Out, Us, and now what I consider his masterpiece, at least, for me, was Nope.
You consider Nope?
I consider Nope the best of the three films that he's done, and about as good a horror film as I've seen in the last 20 years. I think it qualifies as one of the best horror films that I've seen in years. I thought it was exceptional. I really loved every minute of that film, and
we did an episode on that.
I will admit I was a bit unsure because I hadn't particularly cared for a great deal of Us.
Right, that was the weaker.
That was the weakest of
Nope
three.
Was episode 423.
423. Yeah.
That one should still be out. That should still be on Apple.
It should be, but you can always, like we mentioned at the top of this episode, go to Libsyn. Yeah, go to the archives. Go to that. You're going to find everything that we've ever done here, with the exception of maybe 20 of the first episodes that were me and Lee Syatt, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, what was great about this, about watching this, and I watched it again last night. I watched Horror Noire again last night just to get a good feel for what we were going to be talking about, remind myself, and it's just, you know, movies are an entryway to the times in which they're made, the commentary that they're making about that world, but also culture, and more obviously than in any other group of films. Black films dealing with black talent and black storylines are so underrepresented that when you find something that really shines a light, you see things that you weren't aware were there. And that's what I love about this film. It's not an exceptionally well made documentary. It doesn't tell me a whole lot thematically that I didn't already know. That there were no real surprises on that end. But it did present films that I did not know existed, or films that I had already dismissed because of my own whatever personal reasons I had on how I look at movies. So, Ganja and Hess, Blackula, Scream, The Girl with All the Talents. These are all films that I'm going to actively
The Girl with All the Gifts.
The Girl with All the Gifts. These are all films that I'm going to actively be searching out, and I'm looking forward to seeing them. So that's that. What about you? How do you feel about?
I like the content.
Mm-hmm.
I like the same thing, that they were able to kind of really like jump around and give us titles that we wouldn't have maybe otherwise heard about.
Mm-hmm.
I like the way that they used some of the scholars, and I like the way they used Jordan Peele in the chair, and talking about Trumpism, Charlottesville, the idea of jungle fever, not the film, but the phenomenon, the concept, maids, auctions, slave auctions, this kind of all of this stuff that's still swirling around, but in a contemporary way, that the film Get Out deals with. The idea of he's digging the cotton out of that chair, and then Jordan Peele's sitting in that kind of chair, and it does it well, and you get a sense of the history, but you also get a sense of this individual who is part of this Black history in cinema, part of cinema, and making these changes within it, and the scholars, those who are studying it, commenting on it. Now, the weaknesses, I think, and again, this is a time thing, had they gotten the funding, or could they have turned this into like a series, then they could have gone into episodes where they could have gone more deeply. I would have preferred that. Okay. Another issue for me is that you have Keith David in this film.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it again. You have Keith David in this film, one of the greatest voice narrator actors in history. This is my opinion, but I think that
it's a valid opinion.
I don't think that it's that fucking controversial. Keith David is an amazing narrator. Keith David gets a lot of narration work, not only with fucking, it's not only, the stuff that you do with Ken Burns, just alone.
Yeah.
however you feel about that, whatever. But it's like you have these people, Ken Foray, Pete David, and I don't think they were used well enough. They weren't featured well enough to where they're jumping out of the that was what was good about Jordan Peele, is that okay, here's Jordan Peele sitting in that chair. Part of it, I think, is they decided to shoot everybody sitting in a movie theater setting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it ultimately kind of falls into the kind of stereotype of like they all look the same. Everyone they look real casual, and they're sitting in these seats, and it's kind of like you see part of the movie, the theater seat in front of them, and everyone looks washed out with the lighting, and it just doesn't look like. Also, look, some of these people, it's years later, they don't look recognizable to you just off the top.
Yeah.
Because of the way they're dressed, or they're wearing a fucking hat or something like that. And it's kind of like, in there's some way.
Wait a minute. Go back. I can't. Can you
What
say
I was saying was,
okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Having everyone in the theater setting where it kind of, you lose a sense to me of the individual. They're not in there. Not everyone is there at the same time. Obviously, it's just like maybe they'll have Keith David and someone else. It's just two people or whatever. But it's and the idea is that these people are watching clips on the big screen and then talking about it. And a lot of times they're from another film, but they're watching this other clip. I don't think it works because it's going back to, like, for example, Keith David. It's kind of like, I was just like, who the fuck is that? And then he speaks, and I'm like, oh shit, that's Keith David. And I think there would have been a better way to kind of highlight each person. And I'm not saying put everyone in a setting that looks like from their movie the way they did with Jordan Peele in that chair. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying give each person a sense of themselves, or a sense of, now it's this person. And so that we can, like, even it's not Keith David sitting in a fucking movie theater and it doesn't look like Keith David. He just looks like some anonymous black person with Keith David's voice. I'm exaggerating, but it's kind of like, that's kind of how it felt. And not only that, but again, use those people. The fact that they agreed to fucking, who knows how limited the time was, but it's like, you got these people to talk. Obviously, you're cutting footage. There's a lot of shit that you didn't include. It would have gone back to the episodic thing, maybe. I just think that I felt like that was a big part that was missing.
I think you're right.
In addition to more of an exploration of the Romero aspect and the race relations and the subject matter there. Between the first one and the second one, the first one is seen as like this major contribution, even if by accident, which I don't completely buy. And now the second one is like this: the black character feels the black actor feels marginalized in the film. Like there's a discrepancy there, and I want to know more about it. So those were my issues with the documentary. Otherwise, informative and interesting. There's also the book, so there's that. But it's good also, I think, that right now we're talking about, we've been doing this for years, and we've around Halloween time, even sometimes it's like there are those of us that as soon as it's September, it's like, oh shit, Halloween is coming, right?
Yeah.
Some of us are looking for decor. Some of us are whatever, planning the events, doing whatever we're doing. For you and me, it's all right. How early should we start? Let's start talking about horror now. It's not only the fun and games of it. It's not only the kind of coziness of horror. Because to me, it's not all about being afraid either. There's a vibe there that makes you feel at home. There's also the aspect of horror that is not in the at the bottom of or the top of the stairs or under the bed or in the closet or in the attic or in the cellar. It's the horror that's fucking like next door, or the horror out there outside your window, or the horror on the news, or the horror in Washington D.C., or the horror whatever. The social aspect of it, which may not be as fun, but it's fucking a hell of a lot scarier.
The real world is a frightening place. That's what these movies tell us. They do it, and they do it very well in some instances. Yeah. Well,
so that being said, we want to thank Mr. Burroughs, Cornelius Burroughs, and many of you who are now gotten into the thing of, and I like anonymity to a degree, anonymous donors, patrons, friends, Romans, countrymen, who don't want to have to create a situation where Rick has to resort to a fucking watch RickRamos at bluecollar.net, fucking getting naked for money. Just for caffeinating, many thanks. buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. Do the thing. Those of you who are now doing it month to month, even if it's just the one coffee, we appreciate it.
It goes a long way to helping us out. Thank you very much. We will be around, and we look forward to talking to you again. Have a good day. Bye-bye now.